Story 1. I worked at a gas station, and one evening, a couple dressed in black entered the shop. The woman wore a leather collar with a leash that the man held as if he were walking a dog. The woman needed to pay for the items they purchased while I stood behind the cashier desk, trying to act as if it were the most normal thing ever. Story 2. The girl sat on her partner's lap and released the longest, loudest fart I've ever heard. The guy moaned, "Yeah, baby, that's the good stuff." Story 3. I witnessed a group, presumably two heterosexual couples on a double date, at a local bar, all talking and drinking. For whatever reason, I kept watching and had the extreme displeasure of seeing the man in the couple closer to me casually shove his hand down the back of his partner's pants and presumably begin touching her before he pulled his hand back out, rolled something around between his fingers, and finally sniffed his hand while appearing to listen to the other couple talking to them. I wish I had looked away, to be honest. Story 4. I guess this kind of counts since I'm still scarred by it. Back in my slow-pitch softball days, we had an all-day tournament. One of my teammates had a wife who was odd, but we just kind of ignored it. She also had two little girls, maybe 3 and 4 years old at the time, who had been playing in the dust, eating snow cones, and generally being kids all day. They had dirty, sticky, snotty faces, and when it was time to put them in the car, their mom grabbed each of them and licked their faces clean with her tongue. We were all standing there watching this happen, and I'm sure we weren't doing a great job hiding our shock. She looked up, saw us all staring, and said, "What's wrong? Cats do it all the time." Story 5. I knew a couple that apparently had a food kink. They discovered chocolate whipped cream and brought a can of it to the club for goth night, thinking it would be sexy fun to play with. However, the appearance of the whipped cream was unappealing, and food play is best enjoyed in private. Story 6. Once, I saw a man and a woman sitting in the smoking area of the train 20 years ago, inhaling lighter fluid from a can. I started walking over to ask him to stop when I noticed he was engaging in inappropriate behavior with the woman as well. Story 7. I saw a couple at a gas station wearing matching beekeeper suits, arguing in full mime. There was no sound, just aggressive invisible box work, and one of them pretended to throw an invisible pie. Then they both froze, turned to me in perfect sync, and the man whispered, "It's almost harvest time." They got into a car with no license plates and drove off while blasting Gregorian chants. I have not emotionally recovered. Story 8. I was in the Mission District of San Francisco, and I saw a couple fighting. They were obviously heavy drug users. He ripped off her wig and threw it into the street. Story 9. Touching oddly and sensually, I don't mean in a sexual way. He was strangely rubbing her knee with 2 fingers while maintaining solid eye contact and making grunting noises. She was playing with his beard, mushing it between her fingers. It was one of the strangest things I've ever witnessed. Story 10. At Busch Gardens, I was in middle school and standing in a long line for a ride. There were 2 men in their 20s or 30s a few places ahead in the line. Both were wearing tank tops and bucket hats with cargo shorts. One man had his arm in the air propped on a post, while the other man was silently and gently pulling the first man's armpit hair. That was almost 25 years ago, and I will never forget it. I assumed they were a couple. Story 11. I was sitting next to a parked car at a gas station. A family of 3, mom, dad, and a child, was enjoying some food they had just bought. The mother licked the child's fingers, which did not seem inappropriate at all. They were both happily eating, but it was quite unappetizing. Story 12. A young woman in a dominant role came into my store with an older man and had him purchase hundreds of dollars worth of items. I noticed his collar under his shirt. While it wasn't the strangest encounter, it stood out to me. Story 13. A couple is arguing, and while crossing the street, she pulls down the front of her sweatpants and yells, "Eat me!" while exposing herself. She has natural blonde hair. Story 14. I was at the local mall shopping with my family when I noticed a couple in front of us. The man had his hand down the woman's pants and then took it out to smell it. I can't believe this happened. Story 15. I was at a movie theater, and midway through the film, I noticed a couple who had been acting a bit too closely throughout the movie behaving even more strangely. The girl took his hand, shoved it into the popcorn, and then, while he clearly had a hand full of buttery popcorn, she pushed his hand down her pants. Story 16. I saw a girl giving her boyfriend a handjob on the bus. She even licked it a few times when she thought no one was looking. Story 17. Sharing gum. A guy took his chewed gum out of his mouth and gave it to his girlfriend for her to put in her mouth. Story 18. This couple was having a fight to end all fights. The woman took her partner's phone and pulled up his affair messages. He exploded at her and she exploded back at him. It may not be the first unusual thing you'd normally think of, but this was at the beginning of a long-haul train ride, and I believe that's quite an odd place to air out your dysfunctional relationship. Story 19. They were both riding large three-wheeled bicycles with flags sticking out the back, right through the El Mirage Walmart in El Mirage, Arizona. I don't think they are disabled or anything, just inconsiderate. Story 20. I witnessed a couple engaging in intimate acts at one of the last Warped Tours I attended. The man bent the woman over the barricade, and that was the end of the encounter. Story 21. A woman was engaging in a sexual act in the middle of the crowd at Rock on the Range. People posted videos of the incident, and she later got married. Story 22. A man was meeting his wife across the street from a market where I was. I was talking to the cashier when I looked out the window and saw him walk up to her, grab a handful of her backside, and start playfully humping her. It seemed like playful behavior between a married couple. I have married friends who do this, and it's all consensual. They were both smiling and laughing. However, not long after, they got into an argument, which was amusing as well. Story 23. I don't know if this is the weirdest thing, but it is certainly the oddest interaction I've ever seen. My wife and I were eating at a restaurant in Napa Valley. I was sitting in a chair and my wife was sitting on the inside of the banquette. We had been there for maybe 10 minutes when an older couple walked in and sat at a table to my left, with no one sitting at the table between us. She was dressed in a long flowing gown that was somewhat bohemian, while he wore jeans, a white t-shirt, a black vest, and a hat. The first thing that happened was he attempted to sit on the banquette. She immediately grabbed his arm and said, "The lady sits on the inside." She took her seat. She said to him, "Take off your hat." He replied, "What?" She said a little louder, "Take off your hat." He responded again, "What?" Through gritted teeth, she said, "Take off your hat." He did not remove the hat. My immediate thought was, wow, this first date is not going to have a second. Then his phone rang, and he answered it, handing the phone to her. She began waving at the phone as if her grandkids were on a video call. Needless to say, I was completely confused at this point. We continued eating dinner and finished around the same time they did. The maitre d' came over and asked them about their meal. He immediately began complaining. The maitre d' apologized and left. Then, at their table, the guy reached into his pants pocket, pulled out a long piece of dental floss, and started flossing his teeth. They paid and then left. I was just shaking my head the whole time. Story 24. Grab the large serving spoons at the supermarket salad bar and start eating the salads with them. Right at the counter, spooning large dollops of potato salad, cold pasta, and shredded carrots into your bowl while grinning and giggling at each other like absolute loons. I had gone in to get my lunch from that salad counter, but I didn't. Story 25. I used to sneak out at night to create street art. Once, while I was working on a piece under an overpass, I noticed two homeless people behind me, asleep on top of each other. Story 26. I was shopping and saw a guy reach his hand into his girlfriend's backside and then proceeded to let her smell his hand. Story 27. When I was around 9 or 10, my mom and I were in a department store. We passed an aisle, and I looked down it and saw a man groping a woman's breasts from behind. I later told my mom, and she said it was no big deal. Couples do things like that. It wasn't really weird, but to my young mind it was. Story 28. Share a root beer float, Lady and the Tramp style, with one spoon. It was at a bar. They each took a shot of something, and then he fed her some float as a chaser. I was sitting next to them, having the time of my life eavesdropping. It was Valentine's Day, and I think it was their second or third date. Story 29. Years ago, I was walking past a burger restaurant when I saw a couple seated on the outdoor patio. As I approached, I witnessed the man take a bite of his burger, chew it several times, and then pull the woman in for a kiss. After pulling away, she was the one chewing the food. Story 30. I grew up in a small town. For about a year, after my parents' divorce, we had the unfortunate experience of living next to a father and adult daughter who were in an inappropriate relationship. They held hands everywhere they went, and he frequently inappropriately touched her. In their front yard, in line at the town's only grocery store, and elsewhere, I was 14 years old and repeatedly forced to witness this disturbing behavior. The mother was still alive and lived in the same house, but she was severely disabled, and I only ever saw her leave the house in a medical transport van or ambulance. Story 31. While working at a gas station, I was taking out the trash outside and saw a man using a bottle of Fiji water to wash a girl's feet. Story 32. Excluding personal matters, this couple was in the same college class but sat very close together. She took notes for him on his desk while leaning in. It was unusual. This is college after all. Story 33. I watched a girl trim her boyfriend's nose hair on a city bus. They were sitting directly across from me. She pulled out an electric trimmer and started shearing away. We made direct eye contact, and it did not faze them. Story 34. A girl sat on a man's chest with his head positioned between her legs, on a public beach, in broad daylight, in a Middle Eastern country. They were not from the Middle East. Story 35. A person giving another person oral pleasure, and the reaction during the moment was unexpectedly amusing yet somewhat distressing. Story 36. I witnessed a couple at an airport fully engaged in using their tongues. It was not just a simple kiss. They were licking each other. The girl went to the bathroom for a few minutes, and they continued before she left. I genuinely thought they didn't know how to kiss. It was quite uncomfortable to witness. The noises they made were quite disturbing. It wasn't just a moment of passion before one traveled away. They were on the same plane as I was. Story 37. I was at the Cheesecake Factory and saw a couple next to our table with the man's hand down the woman's pants. Story 38. The individuals who are closely interacting with one another, seemingly touching each other inappropriately, as though the fabric of the pocket provides sufficient cover for the actions taking place. Story 39. At a festival, we were staying in tents. There was a group, not a couple, but a throuple, who didn't leave their tent for the entire 3 days of the festival. On the third day, around noon, the guy poked his head out and casually said, "Hey, what's up?" to us. Then the two girls appeared briefly before they all went back inside the tent. The weirdest part? It was scorching hot. By 9 a.m., we were all running to the sea to cool off because it was unbearable. But these three stayed in their tent for 3 whole days, only stepping out to say hi on the last day, and then went right back in. Story 40. I saw a couple having vigorous intimacy in the trunk of a car after a concert. Good thing it was a spacious trunk. Story 41. Sat across the aisle from a woman who picked the dandruff out of her husband's scalp on a plane for over an hour. Story 42. I saw a man affectionately interacting with his partner in a grocery store. It was not discreet. They were walking together, she was pushing the cart, and he was playfully tapping her rear and observing the movement. Story 43. I saw a man and a woman, and I assumed they were a couple. They were talking, but they were too far away for me to hear the conversation. He turned his back to her, and she stuck her hand down the back of his pants. She pulled her hand back out, looked at it, sniffed it, and then he sniffed it. After that, they went back to talking as if nothing had happened. Story 44. I was waiting at the train station for the next train to arrive when a couple on the other side of the platform began a passionate make-out session. Story 45. I saw a couple of individuals competing to see who could throw a substance higher up the wall. They both had their pants down and should consider eating more fiber. Story 46. Dry humping in the middle of a public park can be a strangely magical experience at times. Central Park in New York City has its unique moments. Story 47. A woman in her mid-50s, white, had messy makeup and stringy dyed red and pink hair. She appeared to be under the influence of something, likely meth, considering my area. She was sauntering around Walmart in a very short denim skirt and a sparkly tank top, resembling a stereotypical joke or game hooker. Following her was a man in his mid-40s, a tall black man with clean facial hair and a fedora decorated with a feather. He wore a suede or crushed velvet purple suit with cheetah or zebra print lining. He carried a cane adorned with a jewel, and his hands were covered in rings. He looked like a stereotypical comedic pimp you might see at a Halloween store. The two argued around Walmart for an hour while I was checking them out. She was very touchy and hanging off him during the transaction. I wish I could remember their conversation or what they bought, but I can only recall their vivid image. Story 48. I saw a girl place her finger into her partner's rear end and rub it through his jeans in Tokyo. I was just walking down a normal street in broad daylight. It was surprising. Story 49. Argue over registering for corn cob holders. Woman. Scan these corn cob holders. Man. Confused. We already have corn cob holders. Woman. Yes, but these are fancy corn cob holders. Man. Dejektet. Scans item. Story 50. I was working the register when a couple came in. The woman was placing an order while the man stood behind her. He was inappropriately touching her in front of everyone, and she seemed oblivious to it, as if nothing was happening. Then they started kissing while waiting for their order, which made me feel sick to my stomach. Story 51. A woman was walking down the sidewalk with a man on a leash, wearing a fluffy collar. He was on all fours. They seemed to be enjoying themselves and the attention. I am not judging them at all. If it makes them happy and it's not hurting anyone, who am I to judge? Story 52. A couple was naked and on top of each other in a park while my teacher was calling the police. Story 53. About 20 years ago on a fast ferry, there was a young couple sitting in front of me, sharing one of those overpriced snack boxes you buy on planes, boats, or other places where you're trapped for a while. You know, cheese, crackers, grapes, and so on. One of them would put something in their mouth, then they would kiss, and in the end, the other one would come up chewing it. This went on for easily an hour until they ran out of food. Story 54. In the alley behind my workplace, it was a popular hookup spot where individuals would often meet for casual encounters. The area was well lit and visible from the cross streets at both ends of the block. I observed many activities taking place there, usually at night, but occasionally during the afternoons on weekends. At night, I would watch from the flat roof above, as people rarely look up while engaging in their activities. It felt like a free live show, and I had several experiences while watching over the years. Story 55. I saw a man put his hand down the back of his girlfriend's pants, then take his hand out and sniff it. Some people really do not care. I find it unpleasant when people express their kinks in public, as I have witnessed similar behavior before. Engaging in sexual acts without obtaining the consent of those around you is inappropriate. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.